Welcome to the Commonwealth Club World Affairs of California. I'm Michelle Miao, a member of the Board of Governors, and we appreciate everyone who's here tonight for this incredibly important discussion, and for all of you who are joining us online. Just a reminder, we are taping for broadcast, so if you can silence your phones, that would be greatly appreciated. We have restrooms right outside the door here to the left for those who are here who need it, and if you need a minute or a breather, you can go up to our beautiful rooftop, which has a Zen garden, and that should help out. Tonight's conversation is heavy, and at the same time, we're hoping that our special speaker can offer us some light and some hope and some to-dos. Some to-dos so that we can continue protecting our communities and creating safer places. Before we get started, we have a special video for you, and then we'll do a 1-hour conversation with Pendarvis Harshaw of KQED with our special guest, Patrick Peterson, followed by a very special photojournalistic experience with our artist, Harry Williams. So without further ado, here's the special video.
You know, we had goals for the year. You know, basketball was to win our league tournament. And then in track and field, one of my favorite things about Amari is just how humble he was. He's a really good athlete. He's probably like our fastest kid in the school. When we played flag football, he was the most talented kid on the team.
I anticipated that he would go to college, that he'd get some kind of basketball scholarship. You know, I just felt like he was primed for that, you know, and it's just such a loss to all of us, to our community, to your family, to everybody.
He was my favorite teammate. He was so motivational. He always got good grades too. He was smart. And he always helped people that were struggling. Yeah, he's a great kid.
Amari, we always see him hooping. Zaire, Eli. It's really sad he's not here with us no more.
Even if I didn't meet him last year, I met him this year, and he was like one of the best people I know. He was always kind and got you to people, and like always like a friendly person.
You know, Amari is gonna be missed. We love him, we miss him, and you know, we can't wait to see him again. His name's gonna continue going and living with us.
Everybody say strong for Amari. That's all we do it for. Yeah.
Good evening, everybody. How you doing this evening? Good. All right. Thank you for having me. My name is Pendarvis Harshaw. How you doing, sir?
How you doing?
All right. Good. I'm here, and you are here.
Yeah.
You want to introduce yourself to the crew?
Yeah, I'm Patrick Peterson, Amari's dad.
All right. Let's get to it. Let's have a seat. Brief introduction to myself. Again, my name is Pendarvis, Penn for short. I'm a journalist and educator from Oakland, California, which means that I read and write about art, specifically here in the Bay Area. I cover it for KQED Arts, which means I have a front seat to a fascinating world of creatives and innovative people who do amazing things. And art, as you know, is just the tipping point that leads into a much deeper conversation, be it about finances, healthcare, and things like tonight. Where tonight, we're set to have a conversation about community, about resilience, about family, about love, and at the same time, we're going to talk about violence and solutions for violence. And it is my honor to be sitting next to you, and thank you for sharing your story tonight. And I think one of the first things I want to do is, as best you can, tell me how you're doing right now.
I guess I'm just barely getting by, really. I guess it's like all the prayers that people, you know, have been passing down. It's probably like the only reason why my family is like, you know, it's kind of like I'm living in a twilight zone.
Yeah. And I want to provide a little context. This conversation is about a mass shooting that took place on November 29th, which took the lives of 4 people, including this gentleman's son, Amari. And what I want you to understand is that yourself, your family, you've been frontline in making sure that his story is carried on, that his legacy is carried on, that unfortunately this instance occurred, and you have been 10 toes down in making sure that his story is known and work is being done so that this doesn't happen again. So providing that context, I wanted to start with just a little bit of understanding of who Amari was, right?
You know, Amari, he was a bright kid, basically, like a gift from God, It was Amari that, he bring the best out of me. He was very charismatic, very caring, athletic, smart, alert. He was just like everything that a person would want in a child, especially in a son.
Yeah. This is behind us now is images of Amari as a football player throughout the years, almost a decade of charting his path. And when you say he was athletic, is that an understatement?
Yeah, maybe a little understatement. He was ahead of the curve for sure. I think the biggest attribute about my son was is just like his character. He was like somebody you couldn't really get mad with. Even when he was like being mischievous or whatever, it was just like, he's a kid, he's 14, but he was just caring. Every day he'd tell me he loved me. So, and the consistency of him telling me that like every day, when you see somebody every day, like you have a child, and
It's all right. Go ahead, take a sip of water, man. Go ahead, and like I said, this is an honor for you to be sharing your story here tonight because I think we have a lot to learn from your lived experience.
yeah.
So thank you.
It's like when you raise a child, like, or you see him every day, and it's like you realize what you're doing, but you don't really realize. I just try to teach my kids, the morals that I learned from my grandparents, from them coming from the South, them being from Louisiana. That was like the major principles that I grew up on that what got me here today, really.
Yeah.
So,
And it sounds like he was receptive of it. He understood, and he also reciprocated it.
Yeah.
Shared it back with you.
yeah, he did.
Let's go through a couple of photos. On top of that, he was a scholar, I understand.
Yeah, my son, all my kids are really smart, and I'm blessed with that. And it might be the stereotype that all Asian people are super smart and good at math, but, like, he has good genetics, you know what I'm saying? He got, like, the athletic side, and his mom is pretty smart. She's very analytical. So I think when you put the two together, we are just blessed to have, some wonderful children, some star seeds.
What was his favorite topic in school?
He liked it math.
Math? Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Liking math.
Yeah, he loved math. That was one of not my strongest subjects, but yeah, and that was surprising. Because he was like one of those kids I never had to help him on his homework.
Yeah.
Pretty much all my kids are like that, and that's a blessing in itself to have kids where you don't have to help them on their homework because, man, me as a kid, like I did homework and stuff like that, but it was just like I went to school just because I wanted to play sports.
Right.
I wanted to be like Kobe, be like Allen Iverson, but me going through life, I just try to instill in my kids that you want to be best, you want to do your best at everything that you can possibly do. Like whatever you do, you gotta do it, to the top tier. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
The best of your capabilities. So, and I always encourage my kids, and I've always stand behind my kids from the womb, until now. So I never left my kids' side. So they always had somebody in their corner motivating them and, what I'm saying, just giving them, that extra push. So
It's got to be fascinating, again, to see them be receptive of the work that you put in and also be their own people and,
Yeah.
and find their own path. I think that's really important to highlight, especially as we stand on the cusp of Father's Day looming and understanding what fatherhood means, what parenthood means in these times. I want to go to the next slide, if that's all right.
Yeah.
You mentioned his lineage and his mixed ancestry. And on top of that, you talked about what he got from your family by way of you. What about from his mother's side?
To be honest, from his mom's side, you know, he probably gets more from his mom's side than he get from my side because he has so much love on his mother's side. I admire and I tremendously appreciate my wife's family because they're so family oriented. I wish my family was like their family. They have a very big family, and they really stick together like a tribe.
Yeah.
So, like I would always tell my kids, you don't really need friends because you got a lot of family.
Yeah.
So, I feel like with all the love that he got just between having both of his parents there, you know, from the jump, and then him having siblings, and then him having like tons of cousins, and him being able to actually interact with a lot of his cousins, he's seen how much love that he really had, and it was just something that pretty much was embedded in his personality, and that's how he basically interacted with people, you know, outside of, you know, his family. So he was just a very warm-hearted kid. Like, you know, he made people feel comfortable in his presence.
What about as a big brother? How was he?
Man, it's like Batman and Robin, Corey and Mari. They like, you know, they never go anywhere without each other. It was more like, you know, Corey, he's like the Donatello, and Amari, he's like the Leonardo. 'Cause he wants to.
It's a great 80s reference.
Yeah, you know, Amari wants to run everything, you know what I'm saying? And Corey is more like the brains, but they're both smart and intelligent. Corey's like the more quiet, calm older brother.
Yeah.
And I think that's where Amari learned his calm side.
Yeah.
By being around his older brother, but and I can't, you know, I can imagine how he feels too. I mean, it's like I lost my best friend. He lost his best friend too. So I'm sorry, man. It's just
Don't be sorry.
I was doing fine. You know, just before I got here.
Yeah.
The whole day, and it's just kind of starting to hit me right now.
Oh, they say it all the time. Grief comes in waves.
Yeah.
It comes in waves. It ebbs and flows, and it pops up when you least expect it. And so, again, we're here to hold space. And I can't thank you enough for sharing your truth, because there's somebody out there who unfortunately is living through a very similar circumstance, and they can learn from you. And so that's ultimately what we're here to do. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Religion and spirituality.
Amari, he grew up, you know, Buddhist for the most part. You know, like when his uncle died, you know, he shaved his head. I think he was about what, I want to say 7, 8 years old when his uncle died. But, you know, he participated in everything that, you know, his culture, his mother's culture, you know, does. And you know, me, like, I grew up, you know, I was baptized when I was 9 years old, and then I grew up in a Muslim home too.
Okay.
So I got like, damn, this is crazy. I'm sorry.
It's all good.
Let me turn this off. Yeah, so I want to get this.
You set it on the side.
All right. Yes. Yeah, I don't want it to go back off or whatever, but so I basically got the, you know, both sides of the Christianity and the Islam, and then, you know, her family being Buddhist. But all in all, I think I'm more of like a spiritual person. I try not to put so much. I don't know. I just want to know one truth.
Yeah.
So, religion is something that, I don't try to push on anybody or anything, but, as far as it goes, like, it's the culture. Like, that's what we're going to practice, what we're going to do. But ultimately, I'm more of a spiritual person, so, and I think that my son was, because he every night he would pray and do push-ups, just like how my grandpa, taught me how to do. And then he had, the verse Philippians on his Instagram. So it showed that, he knew who God was.
Yeah.
He read the Bible. I gave him a Bible, but it didn't limit him on his knowledge of other, cultures and stuff like that.
Open, receptive, and again, being his own person, being a young person stepping into the world and understanding purpose. I think that's very fascinating, especially when you combine that with somebody who's academically sound and an athlete, and he shows how well-rounded of a young man this gentleman was. And so I think that's really impressive, man.
Yeah, because for his school, because his middle school that he went to, he was only there for about like 4 or 5 months, and they named a award after him at his school. Yeah, it's called the Mari Peterson Award. It's for character, leadership, and enthusiasm. So not only was he smart and athletic, he had a little bit of humor to himself too.
A little charisma.
Yeah, he was very charismatic.
Okay, I want to leave this one up actually, as we get into the conversation a little bit more. So now you gain an understanding of who Amari was and what he represented and how his parents poured into him, how his family poured into him. I wanted to, as best you can, and you don't have to go into deep detail, but bring me back to late November, November 29th specifically. What do you recall of the day of the incident?
That day, I was, we were spending Thanksgiving at my mom's house down in Madera, and it was like, I'm not really too super big on holidays because the way I grew up. So we was just chilling at my mom's house playing video games. We bring my sons, they take the PS5 down to my mom's, and we would just be like, just lounging around basically, just spending time with her. Actually, it's pretty much boring, So me and Amari, we was playing 2K for a while. And then we got ready to go home. So we drove home. And we was invited to this party prior to us even going down there. And, me, normally I don't really like, going to Stockton too much. But, my youngest daughter, her birthday was a few months before that. And, these people these two acquaintances that we had, they invited us to the party. So, as a kind gesture, we was going to show our face and do the same because we was invited. And, I think it was a Saturday or a Sunday. I can't remember. But I know it was a night where they had night hoops, and he wanted to go play basketball. But his brother had just started a new job, so his brother had to go to work. And I wasn't in the mood of worrying about him being out with me not being home. Or if I was staying home, I would have been like, all right, you could go to the night hoops. But his brother was going to work. I didn't know, I was just like, I don't feel like going through that. Just come with us.
Right.
So, basically, we get to the party, and we pull up to the party, and, and he was the last one out the house, too. As always, take him to school every morning. He's always the last one out the house. And, he came outside, and his jacket was you could see his forearms. And I'm looking at him. I'm like, why this boy got this little ass jacket on? And I'm just like, man, but I he was getting tall.
Yeah.
You know, he had hit a growth spurt and everything. So I'm just like, all right, whatever, man, just get in the car. So, you know, we get over there. I mean, you know, like Stockton is like an eerie type of town. It's kind of like, it's like if you was to go to like Louisiana or somewhere. It's like you could tell it's like kind of gloomy-ish. But I'm like, hey, you know, I didn't been in, you know, worse places. I didn't been in places. So it's like, man, this is, you know, I got God on my side. I'm here, you know. I'm in this, you know, walk by faith.
Right.
You know, so we go in the party, and you know, it's kids in there and there's people in there. You know, it was I don't know anybody in the people but the couple people that invited me, and I don't really take my kids to, you know, to stuff like this. Like, you know, I'll take them to my family functions, but I don't really, you know, go out. I really don't deal with anybody in Stockton like that. Period. So, you know, so when I'm looking around, I'm scanning the room. I don't really see nobody that I know personally, but one person. And, you know, and I started talking to them. And then my son, you know, me and my son was sitting here. Then my wife was at the table with my daughter and my younger son and the baby. And then one of the sisters picked my baby up. And that's when I started like getting kind of started really paying attention to my surroundings more, because I'm like the type of person, if I'm in the room, like if I'm in the house, I know where all my kids are.
Right.
Like if I'm in the garage with the door shut, like I know what's going on. Even if like somebody playing and I hear them running, I'm like, oh, she just ran this way. She probably went to the room. Like, you know, so I'm always aware where my kids are and what they're doing. And I just kept getting this eerie feeling, because when I look up, I try to scan the room. My daughter,
Again, you don't have to, as much detail as you feel comfortable with sharing. You know, we're not here to rehash old wounds, but I think that it's important for people to understand proximity.
yeah.
Proximity, you know?
Yeah, so I keep scanning the room, and I see my baby over here, and I'm like, damn, what, you know, like, and I'm looking, and you know, like, I'm gonna be honest, I'm probably hard to get along with sometimes, but you know, I'm looking at, you know, my wife like, why you keep letting people hold my daughter? But I don't know if she's picking up on my vibes, because there's so many people in the room that I don't know. And I don't know what they got going on. So, and they probably looking at me because I know what I would be doing if I was in the room. But it was just too many people in the room. It was like, it was a room like this, but it was like younger people.
Yeah.
And it was probably some dads in there, but it wasn't a dad like me in there with his whole family, because it was a bunch of kids, a bunch of females, and it was a bunch of YNs. So I'm like, well, damn, like, why do I feel like I'm the only person in here with they kids like this, you know? And, yeah, I just kept trying to scan the room. Then my son, they get up, run off, and I'm like, okay, all right. But the kids over here playing, you know, with the jump house and everything, and I'm just scanning the room, and then the group of people walked outside. So they walked outside, then I'm like, okay. Like, I'm looking around, and I'm like, you know, I don't, you know, like, in my head, I'm like, damn, there's nobody here that, you know, like, there's no security here. There's no light in front of the building. But I'm just like, this is Stockton. This is probably some hood stuff that you know, that's just what people be doing. You know what I'm saying? I'm trying to use the right vocabulary on here, not just be too, you know, but
it's the culture of the community, understood. And so you were just trying to vibe along and not cause a
yeah.
But at the same time, your stomach was telling you something was up.
Yeah, I'm like kind of eerie of the situation, because it was just like, we pulled up to the spot. There's cars out there, But when we go in, there's people in there. There's people just standing around like they security, but they ain't in no security uniform, but they standing around and people looking and groups of people moving. And, you know, I'm trying to keep my eyes on my baby because she's only 1 year old. And, you know, this, you know, it wasn't like she was passing my baby around, but she was like moving around, like walking around people. And I'm like, I would never even let my daughter walk by this person if it was up to me. But since we in this party, like, I'm trying to give everybody the benefit of the doubt, you know what I'm saying? So then my son, he run off, he playing with their nephew, because my son is friends with their nephew, because the people that invited us to the party, they would bring, I will cut her nephew's hair sometimes. So he running around, and then you know, my wife was like, go to the car, make sure the car locked. So, and by this time, we was in there probably like, not even 30 minutes. And so I go to the car's locked. And I was gonna get something out of the car, but I'm like, damn, this car locked. So then I'm like, I'm just gonna go back in the party because the car's locked. Right. I don't need to come back out no more. If I come back out this party, I'm going home. Right. So then I go back in, and then I sit at the table, and then my wife, she kind of like, I don't know if she moved to another table to talk to somebody, but my daughter and my son was still right there, I think. And then my other daughter was like to my left, and it was like a wall like that. It was like a wall right there. And in the corner, it was like a hole, like a lunch line window or something. Okay. So I'm standing up, and then I look at the group of guys, and then one of the guys over there pulled, like, he had a mask on. I don't know why somebody would have a mask on inside a party, but yeah. So he pulled his mask down, and then I noticed it was a rapper. Just so happened to be a rapper that my son just so happened to listen to. A cultural thing, you know. It's like, you know, I personally wouldn't be able to stop that because his brother listened to him, his uncle, his cousin. Yeah. He riding, going fishing with him. He doing whatever. They slapping his music. Okay. So of course, you know what I'm saying, he gonna listen to this rapper. So, you know, me personally, I don't really care too much for him. And so I noticed him behind us and the group of people in the back. And I said to my son, I said, oh, there go that rapper such and such that you be listening to. And then he kind of looked back. And my son, he you know, he's a popular kid. Right. He's not like an ordinary 14-year-old, you know, that just, you know, probably just plays video games all day. No, he's actually like outside playing sports, going to, you know, people, he coming home with money. Like, where'd you get that money from? They just gave it to me. You know, my son, he's the type of kid that whatever he wanted, he'll figure out how to get it. And he for sure, he wasn't like me, 14, you know, selling crack cocaine. Right. You know what I'm saying? It's because I done came a long way from the cornerstones. Right. So in the sense of that, like, I try to teach my son how to get money without breaking the law and use these tools that you got. You got OfferUp, AI, and all this other stuff. So, you know, he liked those bikes. So it's like, hey, look, you get a bike, you need to do something to flip it and sell it. So he would get bikes and flip them and, you know, do all type of stuff to get his little money. But not to get off track, you know, it's just like, so he sees the rapper, and I think it was more of like, he knows that he's going to be a star. He knows he's you know, destined for stardom. And he sees me being a barber, me, you know, doing music myself prior to all this happening, me meeting rappers and being around people, not being starstruck. Right. Like he's like, oh, this is. I'm just being like my dad.
Right.
This is what my dad do. He meet, and I just so happen to be the type of person that just know a lot of good people.
Right.
Or a lot of people that got something going. Cause deep down inside, I want to have something going myself, but I sacrificed a lot for my kids.
So at that party, knowing that he had that battery in his back, that ability to just go up and talk to people, he goes up and talks to the rapper.
The person that invited us to the party came over and asked him if he wanted to go and meet the rapper. Now, in that instance, when that happened, and I'm not gonna say this because my son is gone, I wish he would have said no. And it's not because he's gone. I just wish he would have said no. I wish he just would have never, like, and that's why I blame social media and the internet and Instagram and all that, because, you know, they put this image out here for these young kids to, you know, want to be seen, want to be heard, you know, it's just a lot going on.
Yeah.
It's a lot going on for these young kids, and they think that's what life is about, but, you know, they don't know the consequences of, you know, just being around certain people. But me being in that element in that time, I'm his dad. I'm like, I'm in here right now with everybody else. What is it gonna, like, what could happen? He's only going right over there. So, I'm trying to, you know, let the leash loose a little bit.
Yeah.
Because I know he's a responsible kid. You know what I'm saying? Like, he's a straight A student. You know what I'm saying? I'm like, I'm in the room. His mom's over there. What do I have to worry about right now? Even though I know deep down inside, I'm like, man, damn, I wish he wouldn't have went over there. But since he's going over there, I'm just going to sit back and watch him. And then I'm going to tell him, like, look, next time somebody asks you to go walk up to somebody else, you tell them no, because you know what I'm saying? You got your own aura. And, but it happened. And if there was any time I could have saved him or stopped him from doing something, it would have been that time. It should have been that time. But, yeah, man, he walked over there and not even like, I want to say he was probably over there like 4 seconds. And like, when he walked over there, my wife wasn't at the table. My kids, like, they were like, I think my daughter was still at the table with the other 2 girls. And then my son was like near the table. So then I look to my left, I see the sister with the baby with my youngest daughter, not my youngest daughter, but my second, my youngest daughter at the time.
Right.
And for some reason I just kept getting irritated why she didn't have the baby. I'm like, why you keep letting her walk around all these people in here with my daughter like that? So I'm like getting kind of antsy, like, you know, then I'm like looking for my son. I'm like, damn. And then after that, man, it's just, you know.
The worst. The worst occurs. Again, we don't have to rehash that moment. I think you've shared a lot to paint that picture, to understand what transpired, what was going through your head, the world that you were in, and how we've gotten to this point. And I almost would rather that you don't go full detail, you know? Like, I want you to take time to process that when you're not on stage, quite honestly.
Right, yeah.
I think that's like the healthiest mode. But I want to, again, thank you for sharing that, because what you've shared so far, because, again, in this audience, people watching, people who will watch this, unfortunately, somebody out there has gone through very similar things or will go through similar things, given the society that we live in. And so for you to share that, for you to be open, for you to talk about the emotions that you felt in that moment is really, really big. It's a revolutionary act, if you ask me. And since then, since what transpired on that evening, you've continued to do the work and you haven't let it stop you. I think that is also admirable. And when we talked about this, you said one of the biggest things was how the story has been told, how it's been portrayed both in the media and in social media. Can you share some light on that, on how that has impacted you?
You know, it gives me like mixed emotions, you know what I'm saying? Because I mean, I know there's the world is crazy, man. It's a lot of kids out there, or it's a lot of people out there, you know, making these fake pages and, you know, doing tributes to my son. And, you know, there's some of his friends that do music, or people that he knew do music, you know, they doing songs in his name, and, you know, and I appreciate it all. But, you know, sometimes it can be very overwhelming, especially like with the fake pages and stuff like that. And just, you know, people on social media saying it was a video that went viral with me dropping him off at his like first pool party. And the girl that invited him to the pool party was an older girl, but he went to school with her. And they were like, oh, he dropped his son off at the party and this, that, and the third. And, you know, for my son to be like all over the internet, my family to be all over the internet, it really like, you know, strikes a nerve, because it's like, that's my son. Like, and people just, saying things. And, you know, I had some hate mail. And that is probably like one of the worst things that you can experience when you're going through something, when people are saying, you know, nasty things, and just, you know, things are not, you know, really pleasant about your son to you. It makes you like really like think like how cruel the world is.
I was gonna say, it says something about humanity, the lack of humanity thereof, where essentially you're going through a healing process, a turbulent time to say the least. And then people have the nerve to pile on top of it, to use social media to do the worst. Like, that is upsetting, because you could easily not say something.
Yeah.
You know, I was once told that a hater is nothing but somebody with too much time on their hands.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is how you choose to use your time. And it says something really, really heinous about the state of humanity if this is how you choose to use your time and your free will.
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, it's crazy. But, you know, it's a lot of people that show, you know, a lot of love. It's people from all over the world that's been, you know, tapping in with me, you know, giving, you know, saying their condolences and stuff. And that's all, you know, cool and appreciative too. But, you know, everything has its limit, you know what I'm saying? Like, after a while, it gets redundant.
Right, of course, or even it doesn't feel genuine, right? I'm sure.
Yeah.
But that's good to hear that people were tapping in from around the world, because that shows that there's a counterbalance. I believe that if nothing else exists in this universe, balance exists.
Yeah, that's one thing for sure that I believe in, is balance.
Yeah. You mentioned the music scene, and me as an arts writer, what stands out is that this popularity of violence in music and how it's shown up in the younger generation. I mean, we're of the same generation in terms, we're both hip hop heads, and so we know that hip hop didn't introduce violence to entertainment for sure, especially not in this country. And we know our generation, violence was intertwined with hip hop. It was very like it was a through line. Now we're seeing the next wave of it, where it's combined with social media, where it's combined with the clout chasing.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit more about how you've seen hip hop amplify violence.
And like over the years, it's just crazy. Like, I don't know what the industry is doing as far as the Tupac Biggie effect. The gang banging is just like, they made it like a cultural thing to kill yourself off. You know, like, it's really sad to me, because from our era, you know, it was some substance. You know, people had a story to tell, and you know, and you actually had to have some talent. But now it's just like, you know, combine that with the social media and gang banging, it's a you know recipe for disaster, and ultimately it's just like they just made the cat and mouse game, you know, to the third power now, because now the very stuff that you doing in the streets, you posting it on the internet, and you kind of making it easy for the people that's you know their job is to come out and stop that type of activity.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So it's kind of like I don't know if this is the right term. It might be, you know, it's like retardation. Like, you know, it's like
A setback of some sort. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, what are you doing?
It's playing into the hands of, like, if hip hop is essentially a liberating force, you are essentially oppressing yourself with the music you're making,
Exactly.
which is so wild to me. This is a tool that was created to liberate youth, and to see young folks use it in the reverse fashion.
In the reverse fashion, yeah, it's devastating. And yeah, man, it's crazy. It's like it's kind of like a bunch of lost people.
Yeah.
Like lost, like, and like with me being, you know, I was in the, you know, doing my little music thing, and just with me just dealing with people that you had to deal with, I had to like check myself and be like, you know what, this might not be, you know, my calling, because I'm gonna crash out on one of these rappers. I'm gonna do something, or somebody gonna play with me, because I got morals and I'm a man of integrity.
Yeah.
You know, and people play too much. People want to do stuff for the cameras. People want to be, you know, vlog. They want you to be, you know, the ass end of a joke all the time or something, you know. And, you know, me being, you know, a father, you know what I'm saying? I have an image not to uphold for the, you know, the world, but like for my family, for my sons, my daughters. Like I could care less what somebody else think. I care about what these kids think, and if they listening to me. But yeah,
Honoring your bloodline, and that's where I want to get to ultimately. Like, we're going to turn to the audience for a couple of questions in a minute, but honoring your son. First of all, you mentioned you do barber work, and it's my understanding that you have a barbershop, a small barbershop, and within it, there are pieces of memorabilia that honor your son's legacy and keep his story alive. Can you tell me something about that?
yeah. I've been cutting hair for like 10 years. If anybody knows the barber game, you know, it's a tough game, but, you know, it's a rewarding game. I've yet to meet a lot of people through cutting hair, and that's you know, that's where me and my sons, you know, we bond a little bit more, you know, during haircuts, just like, you know, anybody else would. So I got this little shop inside of my boy's shop, and it's not nothing that it's not nothing extravagant or anything. It's something where, you know, it's where you can find peace and, you know, get groomed and, you know, get some stuff off your chest. But, you know, right now I got, you know, decorated with, you know, everything with my son, because we spent a lot of time there. I used to teach my son how to cut hair, and he would, you know, have his little friends from school, cut them up in the garage. And then when I got the little shop, when I got blessed with that, he would take his friends. I would take him to go 14. Who's dad? My dad wasn't taking me nowhere.
Nowhere.
My dad wasn't around,
Yeah.
you know.
Same.
So for me to be teaching my son how to cut hair, and him getting his own clients at 14, and me taking him to the shop to cut his friend's hair so he can make some money, that might not be something big to some people, but for somebody like me, where I came from, that means a lot.
No, don't sweep that under the table at all.
Yeah.
Like, that's a generational shift. That's huge. You mentioned that you had experience drug dealing in the past as a child, you know, and you to overcome what you were experiencing as a child, to step into the role of fatherhood, to raise a family, including this young man who was doing magnificent things, and you were passing down all the good. Don't sweep that under the table at all. Like, and to say it's a small space, it means it was a shrine. It is a shrine to him, and that's significant, especially in the scope of us collectively not having a lot of space in Northern California.
Right.
And so having a space to honor his legacy, to keep his story alive, I think that's imperative. That's really important.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, you're also doing work with an organization to keep his legacy alive. Can you share some of that?
Yeah, I started the Maury Peterson Foundation, you know, just so I can, you know, yeah, basically, like you said, keep his name alive. You know, I was already like an artistic person. Like I grew up, you know, drawing and, you know, making music and making clothes and stuff. And I started my own clothing line called Flyboy Propaganda. And it's ironic because it's kind of like the story of my life, like unfolding. But since all this happened, I switched it over to Amari Peterson clothing. Because my son, he was he was like a little young fashionaire, you know what I'm saying, in his own way. So by that, you know, we created the line. You could do so much yelling and screaming outside with signs and protesting, but I just chose to channel, you know, my pain in a different way and try to, you know, use my artistic attributes to create something that won't go away. Because I know one thing about art, you know, it never dies. You know, if you take care of it, it'll last years and years. There's pictures that I've drawn for people 5, 10, 15 years ago, you know what I'm saying? And they still have it in their house. So I figure, like, if I create a clothing line, you know, and it's dope, people will wear it, you know, because I already got the artistic drip on me. But, you know, it's Amari is the drip, you know what I'm saying? So I'm like, you know, he gone and I go to basketball games and it's 10, 12 kids that got the same hairstyle as him. You know, kids want to wear the same number. It's like, you know, he was a real trendsetter, you know what I'm saying? And most of all, like, my son had a character of excellence. Everything that he did, he made sure that he rose to the occasion. And that's what I loved about him. And he was very consistent, very loving. So that's why on a lot of the shorts, I put For Love.
For love. For love.
Yeah.
I love that point because I started this conversation with saying that I write about art. And sometimes I feel like, what does art matter in the scope of this world where there's violence, where there's just so many issues we're facing? And sometimes we forget how art carries the weight of the spirit. It shows people what matters deep and down in profound ways. And it can last generations. It can influence the next generation. So that work that you're doing to keep his story alive, For Love, that's moving. That's mountain moving. And so do not sweep that under the table at all.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to turn to I have one final question for you before we get off the stage. But before I ask that question, I want to turn to the audience and see if anybody else has anything else to share. Any thoughts, questions, feelings, reflections? Even if you want to share anything about Amari. And don't feel pressured. I know this is a heavy subject. This is something that we're processing for the foreseeable future. Is that a hand? No? No? Okay. Okay. Please introduce yourself too.
Yeah, my name is Caleb. You know, I only met Amari a few times. I'm partner of their family, and you know, I consider them family as well, definitely. And it just really hit me hard. Like, I remember just waking up, you know, a couple days after Thanksgiving weekend, and Jenny just gets a phone call, you know, and it's like a freaking nightmare, for real. And, you know, it ain't even my kid. But it hit everybody hard because of how special he was. So I kind of felt like we had to do something, you know. And that's why, you know, we've been trying to help out and talking to Pat and like, what can we do?
Yeah.
Like, to make sure that stuff like this doesn't happen to like change the path that the world is going on. That's a big part of why we founded the Amari Peterson Foundation. I did want to mention there, we set up a website for it as well. You can just go to amaripeterson.com.
Good to know.
And read about his story and events we're going to put on and how you can help out and everything.
Thank you.
Yeah, Caleb and Jennifer, that's my wife's cousin. So yeah, we family. I can't, thank them enough, because you got, when something like this happens, you got so many people, and my good friend Franklin, like I know so many people that, what I'm saying, say this, say that, they want to do this, want to help, but when you're going through something, like, who's gonna really show up and be there for you?
Yeah.
And who doesn't have ulterior motive,
Ulterior side quest.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, I listen, but I'm really watching people's actions, and the people that you see in this room here with me today are the people that, for the most part, that I can trust, that I have faith in. 'Cause me, I don't have any more time to be playing. The things that I want to do, I want to get them done, because life is short. Look at my son's life, and I know my son would. He has a good soul. No, I'm not saying that he probably would be like, "Oh, Dad, forgive the people that did this to me," because Lord knows that I'm stubborn. I don't think I'll be able to ever forgive the person who did this to me. And some people may feel like that's wrong, but they took a very big part of my family. This is more than a tragedy for me. He has multiple younger siblings. It was like, he was going to be the one that was going to change the trajectory of the family. You know what I'm saying? And it's something that I would never, ever get over. But I can't thank, them enough, especially Caleb, him being so patient, them taking their time to come all the way from, the Bay to come, just spend time with me and my wife and get the analytical things that I don't have the patience for to do done.
Right.
Like me, I have so much running through my brain and so much anxiety and stuff. I can't sit at a desk for a whole 2-3 hours filling out paperwork and he did that. A lot of people would have, it was people trying to, they was trying to, come at different angles, man.
Ulterior motives, like you said.
You know what I'm saying? And
I think, that's, as I sit here, and thank you for sharing that. And this group right here, your family included, Amari's name across their chest and carrying his legacy on in fashion.
Yeah.
And what you spoke to, having that collective support is really important when you get hit by those waves of grief.
Right.
When you're dealing with the ups and downs of it all, having a supportive cast and a family all around, I think thank you all. And that's a lesson to other people. Like, depend on people who you can depend on, because there will be a time after the cameras go, after the news is over, a year and a half, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, those people will still be there for you.
Yeah.
And so thank you. There was one question that I wanted to end on before we transition to the next segment of this, where Harry Williams, a fabulous photographer based in San Francisco, is going to be in conversation with Michelle, and he's going to share some of the images that he took while talking to you and your family shortly after this tragedy occurred. And I can't even start to wrap my mind around what it felt like to allow somebody into that space. And so I really just, out of genuine curiosity, what was it like to open up the door to a photographer to share the space, even before you had gone through some of Amari's things?
It But to be honest, man, it wasn't because when the situation happened, I was all over the news.
Right.
So it wasn't like, with the news people coming in my house, I'm just like, all right, man,
Another camera.
just another camera, you know what I'm saying? So, but, when me and Harry spoke with each other and we resonated with each other, I came to grips that Harry wasn't just another reporter or anybody, you know what I'm saying? He's actually a good dude, you know what I'm saying? He does, I'm not saying we all doing, but we do some good work. God's work, we try to help people, and, he told me his history and what he did for the community and, kids like me growing up, you know what I'm saying? And I'm like, dang, like, this guy, coming from, from the East Coast, where you say he's from Ohio?
Ohio originally.
Yeah. I know it's cold out there. So I knew Harry was a real one, and he actually, with his deal, what he does around here, I have a little, my family's from my grandfather's from San Francisco. My grandmother, she still lives here, and they've crossed paths a few times, and it was a coincidental type thing. Because he told me about his photographs that he takes downtown in Tenderloins and stuff. And I'm like, man, you probably know my grandma. And sure thing, like, he did. And it's crazy how people connect like that. And I'm most certainly am blessed to meet Michelle and Harry. I don't know, like, just stuff just happens, and the connection. And then even one time I was just out here randomly, and I called him, and then we met on the street, and we talked for a little second, and what I'm saying, it just felt like we've been knowing each other for years. So Harry's family.
Doing God's work and good work. I like that. I think that's something I'm gonna keep in mind too. When you do that, it seems like the universe looks out for you. It sets a tone for it,
Yeah, but just imagine if everybody just try to be a good person. And like, when I say that, I mean, I'm not saying be a pushover or anything like that. Just be a good person, you know what I'm saying? Like, and sometimes being a good person, you might have to give somebody a demonstration,
For the greater good.
for the greater good. So it's like, he goes, so.
Yeah, understood. On that note, you mentioned For Love, and that idea is just resonating in my head, but I wanted to know, is there any final words you wanted to share about your son's legacy with this audience?
I just want, everybody to know that, who doesn't know my son, that, my son was something special. And anything that I do, in my son's name, it's not a gimmick, it's something that I put my life on the line for. I probably would have put my life on the line already, but I have all these other kids. That's how serious it is for me. I just want people to know that when they think of Amari Peterson, that he is somebody that, your kid can look up to. If you have kids, or somebody a kid that you can learn something from, when they think of Amari Peterson, I want, the world to think of somebody that was loved, that showed love, that was a leader, that tried his hardest, and, was just like somebody that, that a model kid, a model student, a noble kid, His favorite color was royal blue. So if you know the meanings of colors, that was his personality. Royal blue was his personality. He just had a character of excellence, and that's what I want people to remember him as. A young king in his own, and an excellent young man, a brilliant young man that will eternally live on. And I think he is I hate to say it, but like, he's like, you know, in the bracket with like Emmett Till and Trayvon Martin and, you know, the other 14-year-olds. He's in the 14-year-old club now, but he wasn't doing nothing mischievous. You know, I'm not saying anything to these other, you know, victims, but I guess you say he was in the wrong place at the wrong time, but I want him to go down in history, and I want kids from age 4 to 14 to be able to look up to my son, to be a model, a role model for the youth, elementary, junior high, high school at least. You know, when you refer to my son, just, you know, for him to be referred to as somebody great, somebody beautiful, somebody to love, somebody to cherish, somebody to just say, hey man, you should be more like that kid. I would get that all the time. So when you think of Amari Peterson, just think, you know, of a golden boy, a golden child, somebody that you can really say, like, man, that's a good kid, man. You know.
For love.
For love, yeah.
For love. Patrick Peterson, thank you so much, sir. Thank you. Again, my name is Pendarvis Harshaw. It's been an honor to sit here with you all tonight and have this heavy conversation. I hope you all gained as much as I did. Up next, we're going to have a conversation between photographer Harry Williams and Michelle Meow, and they're going to talk about photography as well as some of the work that some of the work that Harry has done around Patrick's story. So, thank you all. Thank you.
Take a breath. I'm a breath for Amari, for love. You know, I've shared here many times, I'm from Stockton. And when the headlines flashed over television, social media especially, right, there was a mass shooting in Stockton. 3 out of the 4 of the victims who lost their lives were under 18. I had just gotten home from visiting my mom for Thanksgiving, who lived like 5 minutes from the incident. The Dairy Queen that they kept talking about, like how, you know, the shooting happened right behind the Dairy Queen, that technically was my second job. My first job was selling donuts, but that Dairy Queen was my second job. I was like 16, 17. The first time that I had experienced some kind of incident, a violent incident, was at that Dairy Queen. It got robbed, and our manager, who's like 16 at the time, pushed me into the walk-in freezer and said, let's all just stay here until they leave. So we didn't leave until the police got there, so thankfully we lived. We lived to see, you know, another day, but that's how hard it hit home. And when I started getting all these like messages and people were talking about Stockton, it was like all of a sudden people knew about Stockton. Stockton to me, you know, is home. It's home. It's my mom. My mom still lives there. My brother still lives there. My stepfather lives there. Family, friends, old friends from high school. But no one ever wanted to talk to me about Stockton. And so to me it was, well, if we're talking about Stockton, I wanted us to be very real and authentic about the conversation that was taking place of what happened. I didn't want to just put on another talk here where it would just be another talk. And so I'm thankful that I have a friend and a colleague like Harry Williams, who I knew, you know, his artwork brought more to the table than a conversation, but it brought people to life. It brought the human, you know, in every single photo that he's photographed, especially folks in the Tenderloin. And so when I picked up my phone and the Facebook message to Kimberly, who's Amari's mom, and reached out to say, like, can we do a program like this? I wanted to make sure that, you know, we walked out of it, not just a conversation, but an experience where each and every single one of us saw and felt and understood who Amari is, so that his legacy became not just a statistic, but that we all were all going to join hands to say, not one more. Like, no 14-year-old kid should ever have to experience this. No matter what city they live in, no matter how old they are, and no matter where it was. Period. So Harry, thank you so much for taking the call to say yes, yes, and yes without any hesitation. For you, what did it mean to you to say yes?
I think that when you had talked to me about this, then it was heartbreaking, and I was 100% in. Like, anything that I can do, let's do it. And as Michelle and I talked about it, we didn't want to talk about going back to the tragedy. We wanted to talk about kind of like ground zero, where the family lived. And my practice in photography is showing the soul, showing, like, I want people to feel, I want people to, something that's tangible when they see my photos, like they feel like they're in the house. They feel like they can hear laughter and love and arguments. And it was really, really important for me to go to the house, because I knew that's where I would feel it. And that's where I wanted it to be, for everybody else to kind of feel those same emotions. So I'm like very grateful to Patrick and Kimberly for trusting me and letting me in. And because that's a big part of my practice is trust. And that's how people are seen. And so allowing me that space is really, really thankful for that.
Yeah, I actually didn't think that Kimberly and Patrick were going to meet you at the house. I actually thought, we would, and then we offered it to say, do it somewhere where you feel safe and because the point of it, and like Penn said, was not to relive the trauma, but you actually did meet, right, Kimberly and Patrick at the house. What was that like? I think that's when you started taking photos.
Yeah, I think I kind of treat it the same way as I treat anybody that I meet anywhere, not even in a tournament in the world. We talk, and I'm not asking Patrick or Kimberly, like, what happened, what's this or that. We just talk, and I just get to know them a little bit, and until we're, I feel like we're comfortable around each other. And I spent that particular day, I spent the whole day with Patrick, which was amazing, and we talked the whole entire day. We had lunch together, and that's where Patrick was like, oh, by the way, you photographed in the Tenderloin, you probably photographed my grandma. I'm like, what's your grandma look like? He's like, my grandma's got green eyes. I'm like, of course I photographed her. So that's just part of my practice.
Yeah. So going into the house, I understand that actually might have been, super fresh for both parents. What were some of the things that you kind of noticed first? What did you take in first?
Well, I think the main thing before we even went in the house is just kind of observing kind of Patrick and just like what Patrick said when he was sitting here on stage about scanning everything and seeing his kids and stuff. That's like the first thing that I noticed, like Patrick sitting down, like looking out at the basketball court where his son would play. I mean, instantly, I'm like, that resonates to me, because anybody that has kids, that's something you would do, but if now the court's empty, or Patrick's in the house and he's looking out the back window, and again, like, that's, to me, like, that was a heavy moment, because you could feel that. You can feel that narrative of your kids running in the backyard or horsing around or something. And in the house, there's photos everywhere and memories everywhere, and it feels good. It feels like this is a house lived, and there's a lot of great memories in here. And I always equate that to when there are certain places that I'll walk into and I'm like, oh, I don't want to be here. This just feels weird. I don't like this. You walk into a house like that and you're like, I feel the soul of this place. This feels good. You can feel, like, like I said, kids laughing and grief and arguments and love and all of it combined.
When I talked to Patrick and Kimberly, it was like, it's not so much like we want to focus on Amari as far as like his photos and photos of the past and talking about him again, like it's another statistic, but that the things that made him that who he was, that he loved, that he aspired to be, that he was inspired by, like we wanted to take photos of those objects, but it really, very quickly turned into a lot of other things for you. I mean, I think that you collected, right, like the point of your work, which is to include love, family, community, grief, like all of it.
Yeah, for sure. Those were the things that Patrick was pointing out to me. His bike, you know, Patrick was talking about how much he rode bikes and stuff, and then just looking at, for me, it's everything's about something tangible, something that you can touch, or something that you want somebody to feel. It's just seeing this grips where you could see they're worn out, where his hands were out the whole time, or his basketball shoes, or, you know, Kimberly showed me his favorite belt. Like, all those things are very special moments.
Yeah, let's take a look at a lot of these images that you took.
So this is Patrick and Kimberly at the front of the house, and I think Patrick described that so well on stage, as that being in the twilight zone, and I felt like this day that I was there, you could see that in both of them. This is the living room, and you know, I love this photo because Kimberly's reflecting on the you know, memorial, but also holding this picture of Amari.
I noticed both Patrick and Kimberly have
I even have
course
mine.
memoir. You have yours. I need one.
Yeah, this is what I was saying is, and these aren't staged photographs, but this photo really, I felt this photo, and I think you know, most people can build a narrative of their own on this photo if they've had kids, and looking back and checking in on your kids, your loved ones, even your pets. It doesn't have to be a kid. His bike that he rode all the time. Patrick and Kimberly let me come into his bedroom, and I think it was the first time that you were actually going through his backpack, and I was like, wow, that was pretty moving for me to see that. Some of his basketball shoes. Which
We know from what Patrick had talked about, basketball being such a huge part of his life. That was hard, going through the backpack.
Yeah, and again, if you have a kid and you're going through your kid's backpack, and it's like all these things now are so much more meaningful. You know, little drawings that he drew, notes. Kimberly was sharing all this stuff with me.
There's his scribbles, his drawings. Dodgers. We got to talk.
And it's even in moments like this, you know, I think, you know, I could feel Kimberly just like her processing, looking at this stuff for the first time as well.
This is his notebook. I think you were saying to me, because at the time you went on this trip on your own, and we were talking about how it all went. And this was the moment, I think, for you where it was, you really could feel Amari's presence as Kimberly's opening his notebook for the first time, not knowing what's going to be inside of it.
Right. One of his favorite belts.
So after bedroom, then you were able to take a tour to a school.
Yeah, and then we did some video. The video that you played at the beginning, Patrick took me to the schools, and this was the principal of the school that the first school that we went to.
I couldn't play the whole video, but she goes through an entire. I mean, it seemed like she just really knew him.
Yeah,
and like she had a close relationship with him, and she really was behind him in his corner to make sure that he got through his studies and he overcame whatever challenges in school.
Yeah.
This photo, Patrick, You're like a brother. You are a brother, right, to me. And I feel you in so many different ways in this photo. And this was in the principal's office?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's like just again, like Patrick was saying, it's like being in the twilight zone, and you know, capturing these raw moments like that, you know, where they're just, you know, it's, to me, it's a beautiful photo because it really just shows a man in probably his worst kind of place at that moment, you know.
His teachers?
The teachers, yeah. And then we went to another school, and this was one of his coaches, I believe. Yeah. It had just really wonderful things to say about Amari. And then another school that we were at, a lot of the students wanted to actually come up and say some words about Amari, which was really sweet. And this, you know, I'm sure he didn't plan that we were going to be there, but he had the medallion on. And we interviewed some of these. Every one of the kids wanted to be interviewed. If you played a little bit of those at the beginning.
They all said that he was humble, he was really smart, he was athletic, but he was really kind.
Yeah.
And he was really sweet. And you know, kids don't say nice things about each other like that.
No. This is his other coach. This is where Patrick has the barber shop, so he wanted to kind of take me there, and you'll see in the next slides he has a lot of all the kind of memorial items from Amari. All of his medals.
Forever 14. So at the barber shop, a lot of his favorite things are in display.
Mm-hmm. And then, so after Patrick and I spent the whole day, I said, well, I'll drop you off to see the family. And then when we were driving over, I'm like, oh, is the whole family going to be there? Patrick's like, yeah. I'm like, oh, if you don't mind, I'd love to meet them and photograph them. And Patrick was like, oh, yeah, come on in. So, you know, it was really, really sweet to end the day seeing the whole and meeting the whole family. And, you know, I know, like, after I shot this, you know, Patrick was like, you know, we're missing Amari, you know, we just need him to complete the photo.
And one of the things that you had mentioned to me is we're going to keep, you know, Mari's legacy going on. We wanted to show all the amazing things that make up this person. You actually felt very connected, still there. Like he was there, he was present, and at the time, you know, that you spent there. But towards the end and meeting the rest of the family, some things that also you wanted to capture is this everlasting, forever lasting impact.
Yeah, and resilience.
Yeah.
You know, like the cameras are all gone, but the family's still here, right? And they're all still together. And where do you go from there, right? Beautiful family.
We got another athlete.
Yeah. This, if you, I'll talk about this photo. Amari's sister was obviously there at the party, and a bullet grazed her, and that's the scar. And I asked her if I could, take a picture of her with it, and she agreed. And this photo just kind of I wouldn't say bothered me, but I thought about it the whole way. My hour drive back to San Francisco, that she has this scar that will always be a memory linked to that day for the rest of her life. And again, it goes back to resilience and stuff, and the look on her face is kind of like the Mona Lisa. She's not smiling. She's not, this to me is a very, very thought-provoking photo for me. And if anybody's interested, they can follow more of my work from the QR.
Yeah. Good timing. Right, we were going to wind down, and I hope you all stay with us for community. I think we need each other right now more than ever, for sure. So we'll have a reception after this program. I started with the point of putting together this program tonight is to do more than talk about it. Like, I really want, I left Stockton because I thought that was the only way to survive. And then looking back 26 years later, it's like, that shouldn't be like how we all think about this. How do we stop the violence? How do we, for you, Harry, I mean, your work brings people together. Not only brings people together, but people see themselves, and people are energized and inspired to do more, to do something, or to answer a different calling. And so, in closing, what do you feel? How do you see us in terms of as a community, and continuing our support for Patrick, for Kimberly, for our communities? When we say not one more child should be lost in this way.
Well, at least through my photography, I hope that one person looks at it, and it changes the trajectory of their path, and the power of photography is really big. Like, I've seen it in person in the Tenderloin, handing somebody a photo that no one has looked at them or seen them, and they'll start to cry, and no one's really looked at me that way. Or, there's a lot of instances in the history of photography where one image can change the feeling and the trajectory of something. So for me, that was what I hope to give back to the family.
We're definitely going to continue our work and our support, Patrick, Kimberly, and thank you so much for letting us in and for being able to present Amari. I think forever in our hearts, right? And I'm glad to hear that the foundation has been formed, and we just want to say that we're definitely not the cameras that turn off at the end of the news package, and we're part of you. We're part of the family. So thank you. And Harry, thank you so much for your work and the impact that you do and that you make in our communities, and giving voices and faces and stories otherwise that are forgotten.
Thank you.
So close out this evening, actually, we have a special performance for you. And we had reached out, actually. Do you want to say a little bit about, how much you love Glide? Because you're the one that really brought this all together.
I've since I do a lot of photography in the Tenderloin, it's natural that I go to Glide Church, and I've been going there for probably the last year, but it's just been a wonderful experience, and it's helped me connect to the community there even more than just doing my photography. And when I leave there, I just feel good. It's just a great place, accepting of everybody, and Yeah, I can't say enough about it. I grew up in a very strict Catholic church, and Glide is completely opposite of that. And when you go in, people are singing, they're dancing. Like, again, when you walk in there, you feel it, you feel good. It's a place that you're like, oh, okay, I get this. Like, I want to be here. So.
Let's do it. Let's bring Dennis Hersey up here to the stage to close us off with Glide and build community. Let's get a tighter family together to support Patrick and Kimberly and the Amari Peterson Foundation. Here you go, Dennis.
Thank you. I just want to tell you how, I don't know, I walked in here, and my heart is just full. It's full of all kind of emotions. Anger, I guess, for you and with you. Hope. I've been a member of Glide Church, the ensemble Glide's choir for 25 years, and I live in the Tenderloin, and I just can't tell you how grateful and honored I am to be part of this and to be part of hopefully your healing in your journey, because I've had a lot of death in my family. I had a nephew that was killed on the streets of Chicago, so I have some idea of what you might be going through. And so I chose this song because I wanted to address hope, and I know it's early in your journey, but I just want to leave this with you. Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me. Let there be peace on earth, the peace that was meant to be. With God as our Father, brothers are we. Let me walk with my brother in perfect harmony. Let peace begin with me. Let this be the moment now. With every step I take, let this be my solemn vow, to take each moment and live each moment in peace eternally. Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me. Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me. Let there be peace on earth, the peace that was meant to be. With God as our Father, brothers are we. Let me walk with my brother in perfect harmony. Let peace begin with me. Let this be the moment now. With every step I take, let this be my solemn vow, to take each moment and live each moment in peace eternally. Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me.